What is going on, guys? So, I know it's been a minute since I've done a mini bike build update video on this single-sided mini bike number 2 that I've been building, and I've just been too busy. Got multiple builds going on right now, and one in particular has been kind of a nightmare sorting out parts. And a lot of it has been because of this whole shipping crisis thing that we're experiencing right now. It's amazing how many of the parts, even for a bike that like Harley Davidson that's made in America, how much of the parts are made from overseas companies or overseas manufacturing and then made by American companies. So I've been dealing with part shortages and just all kinds of crazy stuff. And the other thing, I wanted to wait on this video until I got a little bit further along. I just, since I started doing these videos, I've never felt like, I put on a part and make a video. I put on a muffler, I put out a video. I put on a pair of handlebars, I make a video. I'd rather go in bigger stages. For one thing, again, I just don't have the time. And for two, there's plenty of videos out there. Like if you want to see how to put a muffler or a torque converter on or a pair of handlebars or whatever, there's already plenty of that stuff out there. So I just don't bother with it. So let's go ahead and get into the bike, it's way further along than the last video. So, since the last video, this sucker has got the whole front end in, bars and fork. The only thing I have not messed with yet is mounting the front caliper, but I've had such success with this rear caliper that I'm probably going to get the same exact one for the front. The only thing is I haven't decided yet. What I was thinking about doing, which I have not really seen on mini bikes, was I was thinking about running a new line for the rear caliper and running it possibly to the right side peg and getting a go-kart master cylinder and making a foot brake like on a motorcycle. And so I would have to make a pivot here somewhere and then have the foot pedal. For those of you that ride motorcycles, you know the rear brake is a right side foot pedal. So I was thinking if I get a go-kart master cylinder and a motorcycle pedal, or just make a pedal, and just run a line, since it's hydraulic, over to that caliper and just have a foot pedal rear. Let me grab this light so we can see what's going on. So this is how this all worked out. And it's nice because I was able to fit this 2-piston caliper in there. So it's got a pretty big pad surface. And then that rotor is actually a kart specific rotor. For those of you that might know, there's with those rotors on the mini bikes, there's a thin one and a thick one. And this is the thick one. I think it's like 3/16. And the thin one is like an 1/8 inch. And the only thing I didn't know is if that caliper would actually clear that. Because standard mini bike caliper won't go over a disc that fat. But it did. And it was a pre-pressurized unit ready to go. And the line length was like perfect. So it just runs from there, under, and on up to the left side, like traditional mini bike. I am trying out this throttle for the first time, mostly because it looks cool and it was in the color scheme that I was going for the bike, and which also matched these pegs, which I just finished up today. I was pretty adamant about two things with this particular build. One was I wanted to run these FMX Freestyle Motocross extra wide pegs. And I also wanted them to work. In other words, I wanted them to have the 45-degree pivot that you would have on the bike. And this is actually on, for those that might not know, they do this on motorcycles so that if you lay the bike down for whatever reason, instead of this grabbing the ground and tossing the bike, this folds back when you lay the bike over so that the bike will want to slide on the ground. So it's actually a safety feature. I still got to buy or make the springs for them. But I was pretty adamant about having those on this build. And also, I was adamant about having them in a high, it would be a high mid position. For those that are involved in motorcycles, you know that this up here would be referred to as a forward position. This would be a mid position, and then a rear would be like back here. And I wanted a high mid position for rider performance. The other bike I did, mini bike, those were quite a bit lower. And while I never clipped the ground with them in a corner, I just felt uncomfortable. So I wanted a high mid position. And that caused its own issue because if you look at this now, if I had welded that tube in solid, which is pretty normal for mini bike frames, think for a second, how would you get the engine out of the frame? So as you can see with where I wanted those pegs, how would you actually get the engine out of the frame with those right there if I welded that in? So it took more time. What I did was I just made it removable. So it's got those two bolts right there. I added this little piece because this tube is going to want to torque backwards with the weight of your feet. So I added that in for that rotational support. And then this is just welded all the way across, solid on both sides. And so now you can just pull that with those 2 3/8 bolts. And then that whole thing just comes out of there. And then you got all the room in the world to get the engine in and out from either side. And the other main thing with this was, this does have a mini jack shaft setup. And it's like that this time because on the first one that I built, for simplicity's sake, I was like, well, I'm just going to run a chain direct from the torque converter straight to the rear sprocket. But in order to do that with a tire this freaking fat, the engine had to be offset so far to the left that whenever I rode the bike for the first time, I immediately felt that it was left side heavy, and like substantially so. And eventually I wound up offsetting it by putting a big muffler on the right side that was pretty heavy, but I could still feel that left side pull. And I always told myself, I'm like, if I ever do another one of these, I'm definitely going to center the engine in the frame at all cost. So that cost happened to be a jack shaft this time, which I haven't seen too many jack shaft setups on mini bikes that are with a torque converter. Or if there is, they use the torque converter itself as a jack shaft, where they run a regular clutch, centrifugal clutch here, and then this is just a sprocket. But then you lose the purpose of a torque converter being a multi-speed transmission. So I wanted that, because that's the purpose of a torque converter, but I want a centered engine. And as you can see, there's not much offset that was required. So it's probably, I would say like 4 inches, no more than 4.5 inches between that's coming off of the torque converter to your drive. And plus the other thing is it had to clear that arm anyway, which there's more than adequate clearance there, as you can see. So, it helped keep the engine over centered in the frame, and it got it by that single-sided arm. And it worked out great. And I just made it, or engineered it, I should say. The thing with this single-sided arm is, unlike a traditional motorcycle, mini bike, whatever, the rear wheel and axle is in a complete fixed position, which also made this really tricky to build because that bearing carrier being fixed and only mounted from this one side, if I wasn't careful when I fixtured up this frame, that could have literally been off 360 degrees anyway. The axle could have been this way, up or down, 1 o'clock, 7 o'clock. It could 360 degrees of rotation, that could have been crooked. So that was something that was really tricky. But back to the drive, I engineered it to where that's fixed and the jack shaft is on slots. So that actually is able to move forward to tighten this chain. And then the engine, there's still about, you can see that much for the engine to slide forward to tension the little chain that's still going to go right there. So this chain needs to be adjusted first, which I basically just treated it as two separate systems. You would adjust this chain first and lock that, and then slide this forward to tension that chain and then lock that. So it's kind of like a two-part process instead of just tightening your one traditional chain. So that got that all taken care of. And as of right now, I've got a seat pan at minimum, which I do plan on upholstering and doing leather. But I need at least a raw pan so I can sit on it and ride it. But to actually ride this, I need the pan and the exhaust, which I'm tackling next. And other than that, hook up the throttle, put oil in it. I mean, the vent kit, it's just stupid little stuff. So I'm really close to being able to ride it. But this is just one of those things. It seems like the most typical thing that happens with what I do is I build stuff so unconventional that it just takes so much more time because I'm having to engineer stuff that's just, it hasn't been done before, or if it has, I haven't seen it. And I can speak from experience now that for what I do, that's the one thing that eats time. Like, I can't even explain how bad it eats time, is just figuring stuff out. And that's why I tell people, they see the finished thing and they're like, oh, well, that's not that complicated. I'm like, yeah, if you're looking at the finished thing and copying the finished thing, that's not that complicated. But it's coming up with the design out of thin air. That's what takes a lot of time. Like, if you had nothing to reference from and you just had an idea and a bunch of parts and an entire thing to make. So, like I said, I am going to go ahead, and since that caliper worked out so good for that, I'm going to get the same one for here. And I might go ahead and run a fluid line to a lever for that front brake, and then do the rear off of a foot pedal, because I don't really know if I want two levers on the bars. But we'll see how that goes. So we're not too far from riding, we're not too far from starting, but at the same time I got other builds going on, like, this I can't put too much time on this. It's kind of been hopping back and forth from one thing to the other. So that's where it's at right now, guys. And probably the next video will probably be riding and at the least starting. And I'll keep you posted. If I don't put out anything before then, this is the week before Thanksgiving. Everybody have a safe and good Thanksgiving. Enjoy your families. Enjoy yourselves. Try to put all the chaos that's been going on for the last almost 2 years now behind you for a little bit. And just try to enjoy life. All right, everyone, take care and be safe.